And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers. Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Welcome to Chasing the Trophy Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Sanders, coming at you with the Week 9 Waiver Wire episode pod on the Dirty Boot Sports Network. Going to jump right on in. Got a lot to cover on this episode. But first, we're going to go ahead and have a word of prayer and pray for some of the prayer requests that we've been praying for quite some time. But Lord, just thank you for everything you continue to bless us with. And just thank you for just sending your son to die on the cross for us, Lord. And just please be with Norkay. She undergoes her treatments and working on building up her immunity and her immunizations, Lord. Just be with her and her family as they're starting to adjust back and try to get back to somewhat of a regular lifestyle after all the process and the treatments and the just everything they went through over the last year, Lord. Just also be with Crew Tidwell and his family as they go through and undergo some of the same process that Norkay's been with, and just be with them and just lead, guide, and direct them, Lord, as I know you have and will continue to do. Just thank you for that, and thank you for both of them and the miracles that you worked in their life. Lord, just be with Mama T and her in this facet of life, for her and the Nord family and all of Mama T's family, Lord. Just thank you for her and the blessings that you've given her, and thank you for her being a blessing to everyone around her, Lord. Just I know she's a special person to that entire family, Lord, and just we ask you to be with them as she goes through this phase of life, Lord. Just be with the victims and the relief workers of Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, as is still a lot of devastation, a lot of work and everything going through, and just kind of rebuilding and just let people turn to you in this time of need and just all the things that they're going through. Just let them turn to you and let them find some kind of blessing in all of this through you, Lord. And then I also want to be in prayer for a girl that Nora Kay knew that's at St. Jude's called Maddie Summers. She is undergoing some of she has the same disease that Nora Kay had, and unfortunately just not as much success in her treatment. And then she's still battling, Lord. Just be with her and her family as they're going through all of this and these treatments, Lord. Just if it be your will, just put your hand on her and heal her, God, and just be with her and her family as just help them understand why and comfort and be with them, and just let them know that you're with them, Lord. And just thank you for blessing us, give us this opportunity to talk about this game and enjoy it and just kind of discuss it, because without you, we wouldn't have this and this ability to be able to do this, God. And we just appreciate that. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, top waiver wire selections for Week 9. Thank you to our sponsors, Big Reed BBQ, Mimi's Children's Boutique, and Crown Detailing. Our title sponsor for the episode is Big Reed BBQ. They started as a family recipe in 1986. Their mild flavor is right on time, and their spicy is just enough heat. Owner Ken Reed and Director of Marketing Andre Leonard say you can get their sauce at Doug Damona Farm and Feed, Time to Shine Detail, the Salty Brahma, the Quitman Store, and Amazon. And also, they have a new flavor, Pineapple Habanero, which I've heard is amazing, but I have not had the chance to check it out. I'm really looking forward to being able to get my hands on some of that and put it on some good baby backs, because that is my barbecue food of choice, some good baby back ribs. But anyway, thank you, Big Reed. They have been with us since the beginning, and we will just want to continue to support them. If y'all are listening, you go out, support, get you some Big Reed barbecue for the tailgate, or if you're grilling on Sunday afternoon after church for one of the games, whatever you're doing, get you some Big Reed, put it on some pulled pork or some ribs or some sausage, and you won't be disappointed, I promise. So thank you, Big Reed, for supporting us. Y'all go out and support them. All right, jumping right on into news and injuries. Um, really not a ton going on as far as injuries. Thank goodness. No news update on Nico Collins. DK Metcalf was out last week with a knee injury. I think it was an MCL sprain, but they said is looking optimistic that he will return this week. So that's good news. Christian McCaffrey, no real update. He's on bye this week, but they do expect him to come back after their week 9 bye. So keep an eye on that. Debo Samuel, he played last week. He's still questionable. He's been diagnosed with rib and oblique strains. He's day to day, but they're on bye, so he should be okay. But keep an eye on Ricky Pearsall coming off that bye. Let's see, Mike Evans is still going to be out with that hamstring injury, as they've already said. Jordan Mason come out of there, which CMC should be back, but he comes out with a shoulder injury that was the same shoulder he would been babying a little bit before, but with CMC coming back, it shouldn't matter, but there's a guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit that will kind of shed some light on that running back situation in San Francisco. Then Travis Etienne ended up getting ruled inactive again this past week, and Tank Bigsby did his thing and looked good. So I'm almost wondering, I'm really thinking Travis Etienne's on the trade block on the DL, and Bigsby's going to be the guy going forward. But Etienne probably already played his last game in a Jacksonville jersey. Jordan Love left with a knee injury, or it ended up being a groin strain. He's listed day to day. They're optimistic that he shouldn't miss too much time, but I would be shocked if he plays this week the way that they were talking. Just keep an eye on that. Brian Thomas Jr. left his game with a what they called chest contusion, and Doug Peterson listed him as 2 to 4 weeks originally, and then now Doug Peterson, who as we've talked about before, is not the most accurate descriptive coach as far as injury timelines go in the NFL, but on Monday he come out and said that he is day to day, and that initially 2 to 4 weeks was, after it was revealed, was not accurate. Who knows? Keep an eye on Brian Thomas. He's been the only bright spot, him and Bigsby there in Jacksonville. He could end up be sitting out, especially with their season kind of being a wash. But a big trade that happened, we're just kind of going through this as we get to them. Big trade that happened. Deontay Johnson gets traded to the Baltimore Ravens for some round draft picks. He came with a pick. They sent a pick. But Deontay Johnson going to the Ravens. Honestly, I just think that's not good news for really anybody except for Xavier Legette and maybe Adam Thielen when he comes back. Because I think Deontay Johnson, I think he'll be relevant, but I don't think he's going to be like a really solid fantasy starter. And I think it just hurts Zay Flowers. It really hurts Zay Flowers' value. And so that, yeah, I mean, it's tough, but unfortunate for, Deontay Johnson owners. So not very good value for Deontay Johnson. And then Zay Flowers, like I said, I mean, I think this is going to take some targets away from him. Honestly, it could be up in the air if it is going to be Deontay Johnson or if it's going to be Zay Flowers, the number one in Baltimore. A lot of people and analysts think it's going to be Zay Flowers no matter what because he's been there in the chemistry. But I mean, he's been a wide receiver one, but like not like a great one. So I don't know. That's just my opinion. Then keep rolling on. Dallas Goedert ended up getting ruled out for this past week's game. No, he suffered the hamstring injury in week 6. So, I mean, I don't know when he's going to come back. No new update on that for Dallas Goedert, which tight end position has been pretty crazy. Another little note, Stephon Diggs suffered a season-ending ACL tear in his game this past week, so there's going to be some guys that we're going to talk about related to that. Jameson Williams still undergoing his 2-game suspension for the league's policy regarding performance-enhancing substances. No news on that other than the fact I think he appealed it. It failed. So He'll be eligible to be reinstated on November the 4th, which is this next Monday. So he'll be out again this weekend, and then he'll come back. So no Jameson Williams. TJ Hawkinson was close to coming back, but they played on Thursday night. But they announced Friday that he was going to be activated, and he will play this weekend. So that's good news for. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he'll play this weekend on the 3rd. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was like, I thought I misread that. But anyway, yeah, TJ Hawkinson will be back this weekend. So good news for his owners. Juwan Jennings, who's set to step into that Brandon Ayuk role, missed last week with a hip injury, and they says they are expecting him to return after their week 9 bye. Rico Dowdle kind of surprised and shocked a lot of people as he was set to probably have hopefully a decent role coming out of their bye against San Francisco, a good matchup for running the ball, and ended up he come down with an illness and was inactive for the game, and really even some people that I know pretty much cost him the week there. But Rico Dowdle, just an illness, should be back. No big deal there. Jonathan Brooks has been practicing. He ended up getting downgraded to out this past week. And I really think he's probably no new update, but I think he's got a solid shot to come back this week. Christian Kirk, someone else that fractured his collarbone, so broke his clavicle in the game Sunday, will miss the remainder of the season. So there's another little tidbit there. Now, this Jacksonville offense has not been very much of a fantasy hotbed for production other than Brian Thomas, Tank Bigsby, and some Evan Ingram. But if this is somewhat relevant, Parker Washington could have some appeal. He's not going to be on this pod after this, but he could have some appeal. I'll try to tell you where I would slot him in at as we go. But yeah, that's Christian Kirk broke his collarbone, missed the rest of the season. Tyrone Tracy looked like a man against the Pittsburgh defense. 20 carries, 145 for a touchdown, 2 catches for 5 yards, but came out toward the end of the game with a concussion on Monday. Does not bode well for him returning this week, given that it's a short week for him. That's only 6 days to clear the concussion protocol. We will see. We've seen it done before, but it's not very common. So if you got Tyrone Tracy, you're kind of planning on kind of using him some. Keep an eye on that because that could put you in a bind this week, depending on how your roster sits and injuries and all that. But that's going to pretty much clear up and complete our news and injury section. And then last little piece of injury news. I mean, a little piece of not injury news, but news in general. Anthony Richardson benched for Joe Flacco, which is going to affect our waiver wire picks a pretty good bit for a couple guys. So we'll get on that. We're going to roll right on into our waiver wire picks for this week and start with quarterbacks. And number one's got to be Sam Darnold for me. Just been very consistent, very productive in a great offense. He's getting more weapons. Like I said, TJ Hawkinson will be back this week. He's owning 46.4% of fantasy leagues. Not very much rushing upside. He does rush a little bit, but not a lot. Another big thing is the next 2 weeks he gets Indianapolis and Jacksonville. Great fantasy matchups for passing, and he's had a very solid floor so far, like one really kind of bad game in there, and then he's already passed his bye, guys. So as we're coming into the bye, some more bye weeks, Darnold has passed his bye, so you can stash him. You got a solid quarterback. When your bye hits, you don't have to worry about him being on bye. Also, he's passed his bye, and you don't have to worry about losing any more production of some of these other guys that are going to be on the waiver wire. But anyway, also Jordan Addison's looking better. So I think Sam Darnold's low-end QB1 rest of season personally. And, he's looked pretty good. So he's my number one quarterback. Number two is going to be Bo Nix because honestly, it looks like a Sean Payton chemistry experiment to start the season. and has started to grow a very viable fantasy specimen in Bo Nix. And he is clicking in this offense. It looks like his experience is really paying off. He also has a lot of added rushing bonus. I mean, you can really see his confidence growing in this offense with his defense that he has behind him, giving him extra possessions, limiting the possessions of the other team, helping them control the clock. Nix could be somebody that could really carry you down the stretch. Now, he still has his bye week coming up in week 14, I believe it is, so that could be in some people's fantasy playoffs. But if he could be somebody to pair with another solid quarterback, because he's only owned in 36% of fantasy leagues. And man, he's got his bye coming up. But before his bye, like he's got three good matchups of his next 5 games, and then his bye, which is week 14. So he's got 5 weeks, then he's got his bye. 3 of them are really good matchups. One of them is the Chiefs. I know. I don't know what the other bad one I picked out was, but one of them was the Chiefs. It was a rough matchup, but he could still be productive because he's so versatile in the pass and he scrambles. But then after his bye, he's got Indianapolis, the Chargers, and Cincinnati. That's 3 great matchups to end the season in the playoffs if your playoffs go that far. But two of those are really solid, being Indianapolis and Cincinnati. So he has at least 24 fantasy points or more in 6-point per touchdown leagues out of 3 of the last 4 games. And then I think the one he didn't was like 14 points, which is, nothing to really cry about. And but he's got at least 5 rush attempts in all games except for 1 this year, and he already has 4 rushing touchdowns, which means they do not mind letting him run the ball in the red zone, which you love to see out of a quarterback. We used to see that out of Drew Brees. There's several quarterbacks that did not rush a ton, but that made them very fantasy relevant because they got that little extra touchdown there, here and there throughout the games that really boosted their production. And Bo Nix is one of those guys for Denver and Sean Payton. And we know what kind of offense Sean Payton runs: high volume, high passing, and just very versatile. Really good at adjusting his game plan to defenses, which makes it hard for Bo Nix not to have great games. Now, he had some struggles early on, but he's still getting to learn the defense, getting comfortable. He's a rookie, guy, so it took a little time. But I think Bo Nix could be the second best fantasy quarterback of all the quarterback rookies this year to Jaden Daniels, and that's right, not Caleb Williams. But somebody I think that's very valuable down the stretch that you could pick up and start in a lot of situations. Number 3 is Matthew Stafford for me, owning 18.5% of fantasy teams. Honestly, this has a lot to do with Stafford's weapons are back. Their defense is pretty terrible. His weapons are back. They look good. They didn't look to be on a snap count. His O-line is getting healthier, which gave him some solid protection. He's got a good run game with Kyren Williams. A lot to love about Matthew Stafford, and we've seen it before. Sean McVay's not afraid to let Stafford throw the ball 50 times. And so like Stafford a lot going down the stretch here. And then they're also past their bye, I believe. So then we got Jared Goff past his bye. I mean, some trend here for guys that are on the waiver wire past their bye. I really like those guys, but Goff owning 53.4% of fantasy leagues. Only reason he's not higher on this list is because I think Stafford has more weapons in Puka Kupp and Tutu Atwell and Colby Parkinson and Kyren Williams. I think he could have a little bit of edge on those weapons, and I like the offensive play calling of Sean McVay a little bit more than Jared Goff's offensive coordinator. But they're both very similar in the fact that neither one of them really run a lot. They could pass a lot. They're both very efficient. They have a lot of weapons. Also, another thing that I liked more about Stafford is his defense is not as good as Jared Goff's is in Detroit. So therefore, Detroit could run the ball if they're in positive game scripts more effectively, But we've also seen Goff had good games with just 18 pass attempts where he completed 18 of them. So there's also that. So both of these guys love them rest of season. And we also seen him come off a week this past week where ASB, Amon-Ra St. Brown, had not a great fantasy week, but Goff did. And he worked Sam Laporta back into the mix. I mean, he's almost matchup proof. He really is. I think he's another low-end QB1 rest of season. I mean, obviously, only limitations is his rushing upside, but still, Jared Goff down the stretch, solid producer. And then last but not least, I still can't get away from Chef Gino. He had a bad week. I mean, it happens, but he's on in 57% of fantasy leagues, but it was inevitable. You can't go, most quarterbacks don't go all year without one bad week. And this was definitely his. It was Seattle's offense as a whole a bad week. Like, I think pretty much everybody did good, but I think a lot of it had to do with DK Metcalf being down because they didn't have that deep threat, that big that guy that pulled a lot of attention off the defense on the other side. And so I think DK being out could add something to that. Well, the good thing is the coaches are saying it looks very optimistic for him to come back this week. And they're going to be against the Rams, who I just talked about, below average, really subpar defense. And their secondary is somebody that is like very vulnerable to the deep pass, which is DK's specialty with Geno. And I really think the Seattle Rams game this weekend is going to be a high scoring game, as neither defense is really that great this year, especially the secondaries. So I think this is an easy one for Geno to get back on track. And it could be one where there's a lot of, starts and sleepers in that category from the Rams Seattle game. But that's going to round out our quarterbacks for the waiver wire pickups, and then we're going to jump right on to our running backs. And number one's got to be Tyrone Tracy. After what he did, he's only owned at 46% of fantasy leagues, but looked like a workhorse bell cow running back for the Giants. And what's crazy is his snap count. It wasn't 50-50, but it was probably 60-40 with Singletary. But Tyrone Tracy got like 24 touches. It was like 60%. I mean, and he looked good against a really good Pittsburgh run defense. And he put up 140 something yards on 20 carries. And I mean, honestly, when he was running, he just had that. Like when you see somebody run and they're running mean, like that truck stick on every other play, that's what he was doing. And it was impressive, especially with this Giants offense that has not been great. But he's the man now. And I think he probably misses next week. So if he's out there, people pick him up, then realize he's not going to play, they might drop him. But either way, Tyrone Tracy, I think he's a solid RB2 rest of season. And could really help you in the bye weeks to come. And honestly, he might be the best running back coming off the waivers since Jordan Mason. And if Jordan Mason's done for the year and Tyrone Tracy continues to produce, he could outproduce Mason for the rest of season for sure with CMC coming back. So love Tyrone Tracy. Number 2 is going to be Alexander Madison. I mean, what else can you say? He is a low totem pole, running back on a terrible offense, but he is the RB1 on that offense. And he's owned in 54% of fantasy leagues, but he's getting 4 or 5 catches a game. He's getting all the red zone work. It's not great efficiency, but he could be a solid bye week replacement and help you out a pretty good bit. I mean, really, he's been a decent low end RB2 for the most of the season, and he will be probably for the rest of the season and a solid flex play, especially in good matchups where Las Vegas could put up some points against defenses. I think Madison has a solid chance to have a touchdown, and he's getting plenty of catches when they're in negative game scripts. So Alexander Madison's going to be number 2 for him. Number 3 is going to still be Ray Davis. I mean, the way this Buffalo Bills offense is playing, you cannot ignore the fact that if something happens to James Cook, Ray Davis is a stud RB1 rest of season. I mean, whatever game James Cook misses, Ray Davis is an RB1. And that's all you can put it. He's just a super high value stash, but he has some value. Not somebody I'd probably, if I was in a bind, I'd start him at flex just because he has that chance to get a goal line touch if Cook's tired, but or if he goes down, that Davis could have a big game with Cook going down. But we've seen Josh Allen be comfortable with him also. So that's something about some of these backups. We haven't seen them in this role enough with their starting quarterback to know how comfortable they'll be. But we've seen Davis start for Cook and be great with Josh Allen. So that's a little insight that we have there. But I just think Davis is too value. Owned in 16% of fantasy leagues. I've got him on several of my benches. I recommend people to pick him up and stash him if possible. If they have that availability. So love Ray Davis there. Not really many options past Madison Tracy. So that's why Davis is number 3. Number 4 is going to be Jonathan Brooks, owned right at 59% of leagues. I really think he comes back sooner rather than later. I really think he comes back this week. And as soon as Dalton comes back, I think this backfield becomes really relevant again. Until then, I don't want to start Brooks or Chuba Hubbard at all until Dalton comes back. If Bryce Young is starting, then I'm out. Even when Brooks comes back, and if he's the man and Young starting, I don't know if I start Brooks, even if he's like getting all the work. I mean, that's just really tough because this offense is so bad with Bryce Young under center. But if Dalton comes back, Brooks comes back, I think Brooks could be a league winner for you down the stretch. He's that talented. People forget that he was the number one drafted player injured coming in. And we have seen some of these rookies be very productive already this year, like Ray Davis. And like this guy was picked over them, Tyrone Trace. Like, several of these rookies were picked over were picked after Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks was picked first and he was hurt. And that's just how talented he is. And I think he could be very productive down the stretch for you. So I'd pick him up, stash him for sure. I probably wouldn't start him on his first game back, but I would think about starting him after that. And then last but not least, Isaac Guerendo. All right, you're probably like, who the freak is that? Well, Isaac Guerendo is the third string running back for the San Francisco 49ers, owned in 3.6% of fantasy leagues. And he seemed to be the next man up. Jordan Mason went down with that shoulder injury again. Isaac Guerendo had a great game. I could go to the stats, but he put up like 19 fantasy points. That's all you need to know because it might not even be relevant. But he went down. Mason went down with a shoulder injury. Guerendo came in, was great. If for some reason Mason's still out after the bye and CMC does not come back because they're on bye week this week, but if you're good this week and then you got some buys coming up, it is not a terrible idea to pick up Isaac Guerendo and stash him and look at and hold him just in case CMC, which is a very possibility if he comes back to practice some more and his Achilles tendonitis flares up again. It's not out of the realm of possibilities to think Guerendo could be the starter coming out of their bye in week 10. So be looking at Isaac Guerendo, thinking about stashing him going forward. And then also if Mason misses rest of season, Guerendo is CMC's handcuff. So there's also that. So just a little bit to think about there. And that's going to close up our running back segment. And then jumping right on into our wide receivers because there is a bunch of them, as there has been, but there's a bunch of moving things that happened this weekend, bunch of injuries, bunch of change of quarterbacks. And we're about to talk about that because number one has got to be Josh Downs. When freaking Joe Flacco is in there, Josh Downs is to me, the wide receiver one on that team. He has outproduced Pittman week in and week out, along with Flacco at the wide receiver. With Flacco under center and Josh Downs at wide receiver, he's owned in 48.6% of fantasy leagues. Anthony Richardson being benched was the best thing for this Colts offense. And then Downs and Pittman are now fantasy relevant again. But Downs, to me, is the wide receiver one. And I would pick up Downs and start him as a wide receiver two confidently. And then also, like, even with injuries and bye week, he's a solid flex play. But like I said, I think he's a wide receiver too rest of season with Joe Flacco under center. He's a super explosive guy, a little bit prone to injuries, but super explosive and very efficient. But he's also a possession type wide receiver as well. So I love Josh Downs going down the stretch. I think he could be a league winner for you. And then number two is going to be Cedric Tillman. Boom! Exploded. We thought coming out, first game without Cooper, all the quarterbacks got hurt. Jameis comes in and Tillman, did great. Could have been just a, 1 week thing. Nope, definitely not. Owned in 16.2% of fantasy leagues. Tillman comes out with 9 targets, 7 catches for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. Another big week for Tillman. And with Jameis Winston at the helm, and they pull off a solid upset against Baltimore, something that this franchise has been really needing for the last, whole season, for really the whole season. And finally, Jameis and Tillman hook up and it happens. I don't think there's any way they can go away from Jameis, but if they do, it could very well hurt Tillman's value down the stretch. But personally, I think Tillman and Jameis are here to stay. And I think if they are and this production continues, and if you watch some of the film, which I have seen several highlights, Tillman and Jameis are on the same page. Their chemistry, you can tell they were working together as a second team because it is very apparent. And Tillman has that pedigree and that upside. People forget he was a very high, I think he was a first or second round pick for the Browns last year at the wide receiver position with Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore getting signed there. And then David Njoku and the Deshaun Watson just being garbage last year. It really covered up Tillman, but he has that potential and that athleticism, that talent to take over as a wide receiver one in this offense. And I think we could be seeing the emergence of Cedric Tillman, somebody that could be a solid wide receiver one in the future. But this year, just to temper expectations, I think maybe a low end to mid wide receiver two rest of season, but he has that wide receiver one upside, especially with a touchdown. So love Cedric Tillman rest of season. I've got him on every fantasy team. I picked him up. I was so happy. I even started him in several because I was in a bind with Rico Dowdle missing. I knew he was I mean, I didn't know he was going to miss, but I just felt like Tillman had more upside, and he boomed for me. So Cedric Tillman, number 2. Number 3 is going to be John Mechie. And everybody's probably like, who the freak's John Mechie? Well, some college football analyst, I mean, big time fans remember him at Alabama being a stud, killing LSU for a couple years. But Diggs goes down. Down goes Diggs. Diggs goes down. And then here we come, John Mechie. Tank Dell, of course, is getting the lion's share of these opportunities while Nico's out. But they throw the ball enough to support 2 wide receivers. John Mechie could be that guy. A lot of people are thinking Xavier Hutchinson, the rookie this year, but he got a little bit of opportunity when Nico went down prior. And I don't think it's going to be Xavier Hutchinson. I think it's going to be John Mechie just because he has more experience. We've seen him come in when Diggs went down, got 5 targets for the rest of that game. After Diggs went down, I really just think it's going to be Tank Dell, John Mechie. Now, when Nico Brown comes back, it could erase Mechie's value. I don't know. Or Mechie could stay. Tank Dell could go back to his reserve boom or bust role. Who knows? But I really think John Mechie is somebody owned in 0.1% of fantasy leagues. But with as good as Stroud is, as big of an arm as he is, John Mechie is a boom play, a big playmaker, speedster going down just like kind of like Tank Dell. That's why another reason a lot of people don't think they'll start Tank Dell and Mechie, but I think they will, man. I think they're going for big plays or bust. I think Stroud throws the ball enough to support both. I love John Mechie at number 3. Number 4 is going to be Jalen McMillan. We've seen emerge as the wide receiver 1 kind of in this Tampa Bay offense. He was not very productive. I think 7 targets. He was second on team in targets. But I really think Cade Otton is the primary beneficiary of the loss of Evans and Godwin, but I think Jalen McMillan is the wide receiver 1. And I think that he probably could see 8, 9, 10 targets or so every game if he can get more efficient, more productive. And they didn't really have a lot of good chemistry, McMillan and Baker, but I think that builds, and I think McMillan could be helpful going out of stretch, at least until Evans comes back after their bye. So Jalen McMillan, number 4. Number 5 is going to be Keon Coleman for me. I couldn't believe he was owned in less than 60% of leagues, but owned 57.8% fantasy leagues. Really, I think Amari Cooper coming there just took some pressure off of Keon Coleman for being that wide receiver 1. Also took the number 1 cover corner off of him. And now he's kind of able to play a little bit more freely, not quite as great of coverage. I think he's just a little bit more confident in playing, not having as much pressure on him to be that number 1 guy. And really, ever since then, he's been very solid. I think at least 7 targets in the last 2 games since Cooper came to the team. And I think we could see a Keon Coleman start to meet some of those expectations he had coming in. Big playmaker and a big target for him in the red zone. So I like Keon Coleman at 57.8%. If he's out there, pick him up. I don't think he has the ceiling as some of these other guys that were before him, but he's still a solid playmaker and producer. And then last but certainly not least, Ricky Pearsall, going to be on bye this week, but he was more involved in the game plan. I think they get him more involved even more. I mean, we forget he just got shot in the chest like 3 months ago, missed pretty much all of that time, and then he comes back and he's involved and somewhat fantasy real. I think he put up like 11 points this past week, and it was a playmaker starved offense. But Jennings should be back, Debo should be back, CMC should be back. So a lot of people are coming back, but he was a number 1 wide receiver picked for this team, and he was a Debo Samuel comp. A lot of people saying Debo 2.0. That's not a coincidence, and I think there's a solid chance that Ricky Pearsall could be somebody that gets a lot of extra work. And with as injury prone as some of these guys are on San Francisco, I think Ricky Pearsall's next man up if anybody gets injured of some of these guys that are coming back. So I want a piece of that because Kyle Shanahan's so talented. This offense is so good. Brock Purdy's so efficient. I want a piece of that on my bench, and he is a great handcuff for several people that you could pick up and stash. Only owned in 22.2% fantasy leagues. He's going to be on a bye week this week, so don't bank on him this week, but I like Ricky Pearsall a lot going forward. Moving on to our tight end segment. A lot more options this week than we've had in the past. Number 1 is going to be coming in at Cade Otton, owned in 58.6% of fantasy leagues. Honestly, surging into the tight end 6 position on the season now. Otton has really pretty much taken over the primary pass catching role for Tampa Bay, it looks like, for Baker. Definitely clearly has the most chemistry with Baker Mayfield. I don't think any of this changes until Mike Evans comes back. But right now, K. Dotton looks really good, solid tight end one for rest until Evans comes back. At least then could be tight end one solid production after Evans comes back, because Chris Godwin's still going. But he has had a clear connection with Baker, and he's had at least 10 targets the last 2 games. Ever since Evans and Godwin went down, 10 targets, and he's had at least 8 catches the last 2 games. And he's an easy pickup, plug and play for the rest of the season. Probably, maybe even a flex play, but definitely a solid tight end if he's available out there. Owned in 58% fantasy league, so not many leagues he's available in, but definitely number 1's K. Dot. Number 2 is going to be Zach Ertz for me. Owned in 52.8% fantasy leagues. He's pretty much lived on this list because he's floating in that, right outside that range. And I don't know if people are just afraid because it's Washington or if it's Zach Ertz because he's so old. And don't get me wrong, he only plays 50 to 60% of the snaps. But every week he's putting up 9 to 10 fantasy points, maybe 8, because he's like a 4 for 40 something consistency. Like I think that he had like 4 weeks he went like 4 for 40 something. And but he's been Mr. Consistent most of the year. This past week, though, kind of exploded a little bit. 11 targets, 7 catches for 77 yards. A few more targets than what we've been seeing out of him. But with Daniels under center, he makes Zach Ertz easy low tight end one weekly, in my opinion, especially with how barren the tight end landscape has been. I mean, if you've been starting Zach Ertz in your tight end spot, you've probably been winning because, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I've had several weeks where my tight end produced like 5 points, or 4 points, and I'd love to have Zach Ertz in there with 8 or 9. But anyway, in a solid bye week fill-in, I like Ertz the rest of the season. And I really like him in any matchup, but if he's in a positive matchup, especially a negative game script for Washington, which their defense isn't that great, so there's a lot of those where they're, trying to score, throwing the ball a lot. I like Zach Ertz. That's number 2 for me. Number 3 is going to be Dalton Schultz. This is one of those that moved a little bit of adjustment here because I actually had finished this article or this column, whatever this outline, and then literally finished it, was getting ready to record, and the news broke that Flacco was going to be the starter. Diggs was out with a season-ending ACL tear, and I'm like, and then Deontay Johnson got traded to the Ravens, and I'm like, man. And another guy that could have been on the waiver wire wide receiver section that I did miss, Xavier Legette. I can't remember. Let me see. I'll tell y'all, I did straight up miss him because of the trade, but man, there was just so much going on all at once. Let's see. I'll give y'all some specs on him real quick. That way you kind of know. Let's see. Owned in 28% of fantasy leagues. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 there in Carolina. And you're like, what's that guy? And now Adam Thielen is set to return, only owned in 24% of fantasy leagues. And if Dalton is the quarterback, both of those guys could be very relevant. Xavier Legette has looked pretty good at times, getting opportunity. Not very efficient, but a big body, especially in the red zone. Dalton has looked for him before. So Xavier Legette, Andy Thielen, those are 2 little extra bonuses there for wide receivers if you don't get any of the other guys, which you should. But honestly, Xavier Legette and Adam Thielen could be ahead of Ricky Pearsall. I don't know if I'd put him ahead of anybody else. Maybe Xavier Legette ahead of Keon Coleman just because he's the wide receiver 1. He'll probably get more opportunity. And he'd probably be around that Jalen McMillan area for me. But yeah, so just a little there. But then also Dalton Schultz, number 3 tight end, get back to that, for Houston, owned at 51.4% fantasy leagues. Really been pretty terrible all year. One of those top 10 tight ends that was drafted that didn't pan out. I kind of seen it coming with all the wide receivers, but now all the wide receivers are about gone. Where's the wide receivers gone? Who knows? They're all hurt. So, and then here comes Dalton Schultz. Targets have opened up. He got 6 last week. He's got a really good chemistry and rapport with Stroud. We've seen it last year. Whenever they had injuries, Schultz was very relevant. And I mean, I think Tank Dell takes up a lot of the targets, then John Mechie, but honestly, Dalton Schultz could take up more than John Mechie. because he's a very good pass catching tight end, as we've seen in Dallas before he left. And he could be, could be a tight end one till Nico comes back. Now, Nico probably back in a couple weeks. We don't know yet. No real update. But man, I think Dalton Schultz gets a big boost from this. And if he's out there available, or if you stashed him on your bench, could be time to fire him up in your tight end spot, or possibly even flex if you're in a bind from injuries or bye weeks. So, like Dalton Schultz at number 3. Number 4 is going to be Hunter Henry. Owned in 41.6% fantasy leagues. A lot of people were probably like, what happened? He was doing great. Well, Drake May got a concussion. Like 6 passes into the game, Drake May got a concussion. So that's what happened to the Patriots offense pretty much, and Hunter Henry. But he still had a solid week. 6 targets, 5 catches for 45 yards. That sounds like a Zach Ertz line. But he was very serviceable without May. Am I starting him week to week? Yeah, because he was a little bit more volatile than Zach Ertz was with that type of stat line. So if May is out with that concussion, I'm not starting Hunter Henry. But when May is in, I think Hunter Henry's tight end 1. I mean, I know I'm kind of going out on a limb with all these tight end 1s on this, but a lot of these guys have been low-end tight end 1s for most of the season when they're productive in the right situations. And Hunter Henry's another one of those that was low-end tight end 1 when Drake May's at quarterback. And so he's still out there in 41% fantasy leagues. After this kind of down week, Drake May got hurt. He might get dropped. If you're in need of tight end help, Hunter Henry is definitely somebody that can help you if Drake May comes back this week. If not, you could probably let him sit out there, or you could pick him up, stash him, because bye weeks are coming up. A lot of good offensive producing teams are going to be on bye. So definitely somebody that you want to keep an eye on there at the end in the tight end position. So, but that's going to close up our tight ends, and we're going to jump right on into our streaming defenses, which not a lot of really good options. Number 1's got to be New Orleans defense at Carolina. I mean, you got to pick on Carolina. If their defense they're going up against available, they're just so terrible. Now, Dalton could be coming back, but he might not be coming back. And if he doesn't, New Orleans defense is by far the number 1 option. If Dalton comes back, they're still a pretty good, solid option, just because they're just not that great offensively. And New Orleans defense is getting healthier and looking better. I mean, honestly, 3 quarters against the Chargers, I really thought they were going to pretty much hold them to max. I mean, our offense looked equally as terrible as, Carolina's probably did there this past week, but the defense looked pretty good. I mean, they eventually gave up a couple big plays to the Chargers and Ladd McConkey, who's very talented, and Justin Herbert as well. But, man, our defense looked a lot better this past week. I know the score didn't show it, but we held the Chargers solid for 3 quarters. And then the fourth quarter, we kind of just let them get away from it. But I think New Orleans defense could be very, very productive against the Carolina offense. So I like them at number 1. Number 2 is probably going to be Cincinnati against Vegas, another equally terrible offense. I like Cincinnati has been pretty serviceable at times this year. And then Las Vegas is 29th against fantasy offenses. So that means they're giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to DSTs in fantasy. And I think this week could be another one of those weeks where they produce very well. So, and it's at Cincinnati. So Las Vegas is going on the road in the cold in Cincinnati, where they're used to playing in the warm and the comfort, and I think be very productive for Cincinnati's defense. And then last but certainly not least, a little bit more of a dice roll, but Houston's defense owned at 48.3% fantasy leagues at the New York Jets. I mean, the Jets have been a dumpster fire, but eventually all that talent, they got to put it together. I don't know if it's this week or not. Houston's defense is pretty solid. They're 10th ranked DST currently, and they're only owned at 48% fantasy leagues, but they get a ton of pressure on the quarterback. And we all have seen Aaron Rodgers. When he gets pressured, he is not that great anymore. He used to be pretty solid at it when he was younger. But right now, especially in offense, it doesn't have great chemistry. I think Houston's defense at the Jets, it could be a heavy run game. I know that's kind of crazy with Rodgers, but honestly, they got the offensive coordinator, the coach, the management, they got to step in at some point and be like, look, we got to do something. And I think Houston's defense could definitely put a lot of pressure on Rodgers and make him make some bad decisions and keep this Jets offense struggling, because I just don't know if they get it back together this week or not, but I just don't think they do. And that's going to be all the stream of defenses that we got to pick up. And then last but certainly not least, the kickers, the ones that could win you your fantasy week if they put up enough production, which I've seen it several times this year already. But number one's got to be Will Lutz, owned in 14% of fantasy leagues. Had a mediocre game this past week, but they're going to be at Baltimore this week. I think that Lutz gets plenty of opportunities, and Baltimore's defense is solid enough, especially in the red zone. I think it's going to give Lutz more opportunities at field goals and just kicking extra points, which he's been doing a lot of. But also Sean Payton ain't afraid to take 3 points, and I think that matters a lot. So I think Will Lutz being a solid producer in a good moving offense against Baltimore, this could be a high-scoring game, and it could be one of those where Payton's going to take as much points as he can get when he can get them, and that could make Will Lutz very relevant this week at Baltimore. Number 2 is going to be Will Reichard for me for Minnesota. Another one passed us by, kicks in a dome. This week he's at the Rams, but that's another dome. He's been the number 8 kicker so far in fantasy, owned in 16% of fantasy leagues. It might have went up. I don't know if I updated those 2 stats or not, but Reichard's been very serviceable. He's passed us by. He's a dome kicker in a good offense that moves the ball well. I like Will Reichard rest of the season. I pick him up, put him in my starting lineup, and forget about him. And that's Will Reichard. And then last but not least, this guy could have swapped Will Reichard, but really Reichard's been more productive so far this season, which is why he's ahead of him. But Jake Bates for Detroit at Green Bay this week. Don't love the at Green Bay part because the weather can be kind of squirrely there this time of the year. But Bates kicks at home for Detroit. He's passed us by. It's a great offense in a dome. And he's been productive as of late because Detroit's been moving the ball so much better. I like Jake Bates a lot going forward rest of season. He's another one I'd pick up and plug in my lineup and just set it and forget it. So that's all the kickers and some really good solid options. There's a lot of good out there for this week for fantasy if you need some help. Not a ton of running backs, but everything else has some solid producers if you can pick them up if you're hurting somewhere in your lineup. But we appreciate everybody listening. Thank you for giving us your support our sponsors, pray for the prayer requests. Please like, subscribe, download, give us some feedback. Let us know what you want to hear more of, what you don't want to hear more of, whatever it is. But just like, download, subscribe. We're on pretty much all of your podcast applications. So just, support us. We appreciate it. And y'all keep chasing that trophy.
This ain't how it's supposed to be. It should be just you and me. I feel